Welcome back to another episode of BHAW Radio. I'm your host, Brian Rowan. We're at episode 77 right now. Co-host Tyler McLee's on the show. Welcome, Tyler.
Good to be back. Thank you.
Yeah, we got a fun one tonight. We've got 1993 USMA grad TJ Wright on the show. So TJ was Arvin. This is going to be a long intro because you got a lot of accolades, but we'll start small. You are Arvin Memorial Award recipient, 3-time EIWA place winner, EIWA finalist, 2-time NCAA qualifier, 2-time University Nationals champion, University World Team member, and you were a Special Forces officer, transitioned into acquisitions, and currently the president and owner of Offset Strategic Services and a managing partner for Offset Systems Group. Did I get all that right?
Yeah, that sounds great, man. Good job.
Awesome. Well, welcome to the show. This is gonna be fun.
Man, I'm happy to be here. I know we were trying, planning was difficult because of the schedule, but glad we're finally here and looking forward to talking with you guys.
Yeah, no, I think it worked out better for this because, I mean, it's March. It's, between EIWAs and NCAAs. I think, more people tune in to wrestling this time of year.
Yeah.
I think it was good the way the delay worked out.
All right, cool.
So,
glad it worked.
So you're in Alabama right now. What's the weather there like?
Man, so people that aren't from, when I came down to Alabama for the first time, I was expecting it to be like, stereotypically hot, south, but it's Huntsville, Alabama is it's cold right now. It's like, I don't know, it's like 40 or 50 degrees. So it gets there cold, but it'll warm up here pretty soon. But I shouldn't say it's probably 40s, 50s, somewhere around there, but it's cooler than you think it would be in the South and in Alabama. So
yeah, and I wish we could have done this episode live, a couple weeks ago when you were planning to come to West Point, but that didn't work out. I guess you were coming up. Your son's interested in going, so I'm sure that's got to be.
Yeah, he's going to USMAPS. United States Military Private. Yeah, that's right. Well, yeah. So so you got a presidential nomination and you got some other nominations, but this was a route that he chose and they thought would be best for him. But he didn't need wrestling to get into USMAPS or West Point. I did. But yeah, I'm really proud of my son. He's and I may have some other kids. I have 4 kids, and we'll see what happens with those.
So I'm guessing he's the oldest.
He is.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So TJ, so you're in Alabama now, but you're originally from New York, right?
That's right. So right behind us, I think best wrestling in the country, Tyler, I think is in New York, and then Penn State, I think, is right behind us. They're working hard. I say that, and I hope Dave Warnick's watching because will irritate him.
I'm sure he's going to listen in.
So growing up upstate New York, what got you into wrestling? How'd that get started?
Oh man, so it started because my dad he wrestled for Minnesota State, which used to be Mankato State, and my dad wrestled for. I'm giving you a little bit of context history, but my dad wrestled for Rummy Macius, Hall of Famer, and so my dad was a wrestler. He was a coach. He became a teacher and a coach, varsity coach. And, at 5 years old, that's what I thought. He was a wrestling coach, lots of people wrestling around me. That's what I thought you did. That said, get on the mat. All right. So 5 years old, started wrestling. And, maybe a couple months later was in my first tournament, which was the schoolboy AAU. They used to have like AAU, not USA Wrestling, right? AAU tournament. And that was my first tournament, and turned out well. There's a story to that one too, but so I wrestled in that tournament, and then my dad set things up where he was the head coach. So there was he had he set up with the other varsity coach. He's like, hey, you got a 45 pounder, 5, 6 years old, 50 pounder, I don't care. And so he did exhibitions. So and the crowd loved it because it had these 2 little tykes rolling around the mat, under the lights. And that's where I kind of got the love for wrestling and wrestling under the lights, and that's, how in New York State, tournaments, matches, it's all under the lights and it's a big spectacle. And man, that was a lot of fun. So that's how I started. Dad was a wrestler, and then I became a wrestler, and that's what I thought we were in a big wrestling town. Our high school was prolifically, awesome in wrestling, and all my friends wrestled.
Yeah,
so that was.
no, New York is definitely a wrestling state, although it probably doesn't get the publicity that Pennsylvania does, and I mean rightfully so. But you play any other sports growing up, or was it just wrestling?
Yeah, so my dad was our two best sports in our high school were wrestling and swimming, and he coached both of those. He went from one school when he was a varsity coach, and then came over to Burn Hills in Section 2. But I did swim, and my sister was a Division I swimmer. She was a captain of the Cornell swim team and was a really good swimmer. And I was considering going to Cornell. Yeah.
So I find it interesting how, like, when you hear about like some of the better, bigger wrestlers who, wrestled in 7th grade in New York or in Minnesota, and they're usually smaller guys who are wrestling at like 103, now 106. You're a bigger guy, what did you wrestle as a 7th grader?
I was
wrestling 11th and 12th graders. What?
Yeah. So I started off, so New York used to have, I don't know what the weights are now, 91 pounds. That's pretty small. And so 7th grade, there was another JP Epifanio, a really good wrestler. He wrestled for Whitehall, and his coach was a Lehigh college wrestler. He and I were the two first 7th graders and on the mat. And, so how I got into that is, dad's coach, and he and Coach Koch, the head coach, when it came over to the other school, dad was a JV coach. They put me on the mat in 6th grade. So I actually wrestled with a 91 pounder when I was in 6th grade. I didn't compete, and then that prepped me for my 7th grade. But I just started wrestling, getting out there, and did well my first year in 7th grade. Now I was, it started at 5, and what helped me was, my dad was just tough, and he's always wanted me to be tough and scrappy. And I had enough, physicality to me, but I hadn't hit puberty yet. Shoot, I didn't hit puberty probably until, 8th, 9th grade. Really, I started to, muscle started to come even more. But it's tough when I was still a little kid in 7th grade.
Yeah, I could just imagine being a 7th grader wrestling like 10th, 11th, 12th graders. Like,
yeah, no. So some of the, I don't know. So there was I wrestled a 12th grader at the beginning of the year, and he was at 91 pounds. He was a small person. I don't know what the right lingo, but a small person, right? And he was, So when I first wrestled him in the beginning of the year, he just pummeled me. And at the end of the year, I don't know if it was in the Class A's or whatever tournament it was, I beat him. So that was, and so I did wrestle, there's not a lot of, it's usually at 91 pounds, it's younger guys, 9th graders and 10th graders, but there are some juniors and seniors in there.
Did you start wrestling Greco when you were young too? I know.
I started at 5, and then, so I started Greco at 6, and my first big Greco tournament was the Eastern Nationals, which was AAU before USA Wrestling. But I started,
like the Mawas?
Atwa.
Was it Mawas? Is that the for when you said Eastern Nationals? It makes me think of
Brian's trying to give it a plug because he's wrestling in Mawas in a couple weeks. He's about to go public with it, but he's trying to hype it up like people know what it is, so it sounds cool that he's doing it. So we're just going along with it.
I know there's a hotel in New Jersey, Mawa, isn't it? Right.
Well, that's a town, but Mawa stands for Mid-Atlantic Wrestling Association.
It's at the hotel.
Yeah, so I mean, you asked Tyler about wrestling, Greco and freestyle, so that was big in upstate New York. And so Greco I started because one of the most it was the most prolific, most successful Greco and freestyle, but mostly Greco was the Adirondack Freestyle Wrestling Association. So from a very young age, I started off there. Joe DeMeo was the head coach, and he was like a 4-time assistant Olympic coach, 4-time world team coach. I mean, he actually, I think, coached almost 300 US national champions and like 41 world team member. I mean, this dude was amazing for wrestling, and I learned so much from my dad, from and Joe DeMeo. But so if you're in upstate in Section 2 and you're near Albany, you wrestled in Atwa, and that really made me the wrestler. A lot of things made me successful and able to compete in the Division I was because of Greco. It added another skill, like in mixed martial arts, another set of tools in the kit bag.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that, how that helped you become like a well-rounded, because you got a lot of accolades from high school too. That's kind of where I was going to transition next to your story about New York State finals your senior year.
Yeah, well, so I tell you, the thing that helped me, and I've got a viewpoint on wrestling, and you watch kids and how much they wrestle now. They like every damn day. I mean, and they're banging and they're burning out, right? And we can talk about when I burned out. That's later, if you remember. We'll talk about that. But when I was a young kid, we wrestled once on the Saturdays, and it was a big deal. But what we got at our wrestling program, I think, is a little bit different. I mean, all wrestling programs do gymnastics. We did, tumbling and gymnastics, and it's kind of like what the Soviets did. And I'm not a big fan of the Soviets, but their wrestlers are are amazing. But we did a lot of tumbling. We had a lot of upper body, and we even had some judo in there. And that was because of Jason Morris, a teammate. He was a 2-time state champion and went on to Syracuse as an All-American. But I learned a lot of judo. My dad was a judo fighter, player, whatever you want to call it. So what helped me was everybody knows how to do a high crotch and single, double, all the basic, and there's a lot of funky stuff that goes on now. But what helped me, in my wrestling was I had, just like in mixed martial arts, if you're just a boxer, if you've got some skills like ground game, boxing game, wrestling game, Muay Thai. So that's what helped me with Division I, is I had judo or Greco and judo added with the other wrestling, and that's what helped me be more successful. And that's what I would say. Just if you're raising a young boy or girl wrestling, get them, especially at a young age, get them into the gymnastics, get them into some learning judo, and get them into those. And get that first, and then get the wrestling, the normal standard wrestling. You're going to get that, but really focus on the technique and the balance of movement, and that stuff really makes you, I think, a tremendous wrestler, is having all those other skills.
Yeah, I think it kind of helps. Wrestling can be a grind, especially like early on. Like if you're doing that from 5 years old to 10 years old,
Yeah.
It can be a grind if you're as a parent not paying attention, not consciously thinking about it. I think it's a good point to getting involved in something earlier, maybe getting involved in wrestling like a few years later than normal,
or just light. And right now, I'm not a big fan of the Soviet Union or Russia, especially what's going on right now. But you look back in the 70s and 80s. And 90s, they started off, with tumbling. They started off with, sambo and judo and technique. And then they compete more later, so, there's so you'll see, and that's why we have, if you look at all the stands and all the Olympic medals, the former Soviet Union, has a lot of champions, is because I think they take a different approach to wrestling. But again, I'm not a fan of Russia or the Soviet Union, especially with or former Soviet Union, what's going on right now in the world. But there are things that we can learn from on how they used to train, or how they develop their young wrestlers.
There's a really interesting documentary that on Rudis. Kyle Snyder's on there. He visited Dagestan a couple months ago, and like all the like elite Russian wrestlers, like basically they gave him like a, they let him, took him around the country, or around Dagestan for like 10 days, and they became like really close and good friends. And it looks like there's like good ties between the wrestling program, the wrestlers there, and at least Kyle Snyder. It was really cool. I didn't realize how like I had this idea of like Russia being like, Rocky IV, like Moscow. But when I see Dagestan, I see like Afghanistan. Like I don't see it's. I didn't realize the parity in Russia and the differences, in the cultures within the country.
Yeah, and so you've seen stuff, Dave Schultz. I can't remember that special they had on his tragic demise there, but he was a big student of other cultures, and when he would come to the when he went and run over to Russia, and they came over, they talked to him, and he learned their language, but he learned a lot about how they trained. And my coach, my freestyle Greco coach, Joe DeMayo, he was studying how they train, so I learned at a really young age a lot of the Eastern Bloc wrestling moves, and that helped my Greco and my freestyle, which I think I pretty much carried through. There's a lot of things I did in college that come from guys like Dave Schultz and some of the guys that I wrestled. So when I was a ninth grade, I had a really good opportunity, and it was because of my dad and my relationship with Joe DeMayo. In ninth grade, I was Sean Sheldon's throwing dummy. Sean Sheldon was in '92 was silver medalist in the Olympics, and he would beat on me, ruthlessly. And I was his throwing dummy, and but he and then I wrestled. I was a partner for Ike Anderson, 136.5. He was the USA Wrestling Greco development guy, a director, and then Andy Sears. All these guys, knew all the Russians. They talked to them. They'd learn and talk about wrestling, but there was an appreciation of USA wrestling and Russia at that time, even though we were in a Cold War and things were pretty dark then, so sometimes the governments are a little bit different than the people, but
so kind of transitioning into like you choosing to go to West Point. How did that come to be, in high school? When did you first, you have an older sister that went to Cornell, or is she younger?
No, she's older sister. So, we had a lot of recruited guys out of our high school, and, I saw, the pressure of scholarships and, performance injuries and all that stuff. And so I was at the junior nationals. I started off in ninth grade and I had some success out at the junior nationals in ninth and 10th grade. And coach, is it Wicks out of Navy, started talking to me. And I was planning on going to the Naval Academy, went up for a trip. I think it was like ninth grade. Yeah, no kidding. So I was planning on actually going to Naval Academy, and I was looking at some other schools. I was trying to use my wrestling to get the best degree I could, the best education I could. But it was my junior year after it's my junior year. It's between junior and senior year at the junior nationals. Jack Spates, you guys have heard this name before. He was assistant coach, and he recruited Warnick and me and others. He talked to my grandparents that were at the junior nationals, and then talked to my parents, and my dad was the coach, and then talked to me and said, "Hey, TJ, I heard you want to study finance and economics, and you want to go into the corporate side." And he goes, West Point, I really want you to, and he also knew that I wanted to go to the Naval Academy. why don't you come on down? So we had a trip. I think Warnick was on that trip too, but he had spates at his house had all these professors and different folks there. One of them was out of the econ department. He's like, "Hey TJ, I heard that you're very interested," and he worked it. He was very good, and said, "Here's what the average West Point graduate makes." I was like, "Damn!" And it was like $78,000. This is for somebody that was this back in in the late '80s, and I was like, "Wow, $78,000. That's a lot." And so I changed my mind, and my senior year, it's like Coach Wicks would call and, "Hey, what's going on?" And so I'm going to West Point, and I mean, and it got bad over a month or two, where my dad said, "Hey, don't call my son," to the Naval Academy coach. But I made the right decision and went to Army. So, but that's kind of how it happened. And there were some other schools I was interested in, and kind of funny stories. I was interested in Harvard. I was interested in UPenn because of a Wharton School of Business. And when the UPenn coach was talking to me, it's like, "Well, what can you?" I didn't know. I was 17 years old. What can you offer? Can you get me into Wharton School of Business? Well, it doesn't work that way. You've gotta perform as an undergrad. But if you perform well as an undergrad and you apply, you have a good shot at getting into Wharton. It's like, well, I don't want that. Yeah. So,
what did you think about the military side of the house? Like, what did you know, or was that something you were interested in? Because I know you talked about like the finance and the corporate world. How did
so I really when I was at West Point, I mean, I learned, I internalized a lot of things, and I went to West Point for other reasons, I think. And then you kind of internalize the character and value trait development and all the things that you learn there. But I chose military intelligence because I was going to get out in 5 years. I was going to go I want to go in the corporate world. So I chose military intelligence. Sounded cool and be good on my resume. Next thing I knew, I get into the Army, and I'm at the basic course, and I'm working out and running, and I show up at PT one morning. I have 2 months before I can start the basic course, so I had a Blackbird, white, whatever they call it. So I was looking to do some PT with somebody, and I was there early at what's called Apache Flats, and no one had showed up yet. And there's this group of guys that were under a mesquite tree. It was dark, and it's like, "Hey guys, what's going on?" And there was Captain Sad. Didn't know it was Captain Sad at the time. "Well, we're doing PT. Can you run?" And it's like, "Yeah, I can run." And it's like, "You want to run with us?" And sure. So he goes, "All right." And then they took off. It's at 3,500 feet above sea level. They took off, and I kept up with them. I mean, it was just a mass of guys going. Finished up, and he goes, "Hey, you want to keep working out with us?" And that sounds great. And I'm Captain Sad. I'm running this RIP program. You want to just keep running with us? It's like, okay. So then I got into the basic course, and I kept working out with these guys. There's some Ranger Regiment guys that were NCOs that were now in the officer course, in the basic officer course, and that's how I kind of got in. I got into this RIP program for 5 months. It's a 6 months basic course for MI, and ended up going to Ranger School because I was, working out and doing, sucking it down. I mean, because you had to do all these you had to do these field problems and but it was with a real bunch of a good bunch of guys, and that kind of got me into I want to go to Ranger School, and it set me on another path. Once I was Ranger qualified, I was like, all right, this is kind of cool.
What'd you think when you branched MI, because you wanted to get out in 5 years and go into the corporate world, and then you're in Ranger School with a ruck on your back and not sleeping for days at a time, and you're like, I'm basically an infantry officer at this point. Like
I was, and it's kind of funny. I was an infantry officer, and it wasn't what I planned on doing. I didn't want to do any of the airborne school, any of that stuff when I was at West Point. I wanted, I'm already a wrestler, and it's sucking it down 2 practices a day and all that stuff. I'm grinding enough. But I'm in Ranger School. I was like, what the hell I'm doing here? But it wasn't, Ranger School sucked because of the sleep part. The food part wasn't bad because we're wrestlers. Because I think it's like I can drink all the water I want, but it does take
in 62 days, or did you?
I did, and and that's by luck. I made it straight through, and a lot of that is the luck of the patrols and what have you. And there's patrols I messed up, but I was I was a wrestler. Violence of action on the objective, and it's like, all right, you sucked in all these areas, but damn, that was good. So so really, Ranger School is a tough course, and so there's a lot of luck in there. A lot of guys get recycled. Great guys get recycled. So I was very fortunate. But that changed my path. So I went to the 82nd Airborne, and I was a BIC, and and there was a kind of a joke about add an H on the end or a T CH on there, but a BIC's a battlefield intelligence coordinator, something I forget what it's called. But I was, Ranger qualified, MI guy in there, and we prepped for Haiti. We were supposed to jump into Haiti, and that was really good exposure to some intelligence agencies and stuff like that. But we didn't jump in. But not long after that, my battalion commander, Steve Fondacaro, was a West Point grad, came out of Ranger Regiment, amazing, great leader. And he said, hey, the 82nd Airborne won Best Ranger in 1994. Do you want to go to Best Ranger competition? And I was like, what's that, sir? And he's like, he explained it. It's like, that sounds, he saw me run on the street there, and, I was in good shape. And so I just, it was like 6 weeks away. I trained every day, running 6 miles and do push-ups and sit-ups. That's all I did. And then did this 2-day competition in the 82nd and made the team. And then we did like SD and went to the Best Ranger competition. So it's kind of funny there. Doug McCormick, you guys have heard that name before, who was the first captain, great, wrestler leader.
Was he your last minute, or was he a year behind? Was he a year behind?
Oh no, he was 3 years. So he was when I was a plebe, he was a cow. So yeah, he was ahead of me. He was older than me.
Okay.
Yeah. But anyways, he was at the Best Ranger competition. We took Liam and Collins, who eventually found a good partner and won it. He did it I think on his 4th time. Doug, I think, did once or no, it's at least twice. Could have been 2 times or 3 times. At least twice he took 2nd, which and that's a tough competition.
Yeah.
A lot of fun though. Yeah. A lot of fun. So that got me into and so you're getting back to the infantry, Tyler. So I'm in the 82nd Airborne in the infantry battalion, Airborne Infantry Regiment, and the battalion commander, Steve Fondacaro, said, hey, I'm gonna make you the scout platoon leader. And I said, do you want to do that? And I was like, sure, sir. And so I became scout platoon leader. And then, so my career kept on, it was just guys saying, hey, would you like to do this? You want to, yeah, I'll do that. That sounds great. And how that got me into special forces was, I socialized, I started, when I was a scout platoon leader, we were supposed to go to Bosnia, Tuzla in 1995 in the very beginning. So we got a lot of training for 6 months, including at SWIC. And I started interfacing with special forces, some officers, but mostly NCOs. And they said, hey, you should go special forces. Do you want to go special forces? That sounds great. So that's how I got into special forces. So it's, it's crazy how, I planned on 5 and fly, going to the corporate world, and then there's a path there to, 22 years later, and I retired.
Wow, how it all works out.
Yeah, it really is.
Circling back to kind of, the beginning, back to West Point now, because we definitely don't want to just disregard all of your years competing. We definitely want to, talk about a lot of those stories. You went to prep school, right?
I did.
Okay.
Yep.
What was that like? Was there did you guys have a wrestling coach then, or like how?
It was Bill George. He was a great guy. He was like the coach. he was the football coach and the wrestling coach. His name was Bill George, super guy. And it was, we had a pretty good team. We had, Warnick and Reno Arredondo, Dave Abrams, and there's a list of other guys as well. But that was a great year. So I mean, I highly recommend. I needed it for academics and just to get myself up one more year. But what it helped me in wrestling was it gave me a year to mature physically, a year to mature physically and mentally, and prep for Division I wrestling and prep for West Point. This the cadet life. But it was great for wrestling because I got another year of, I was a late bloomer, just like Warnick, it gave us another year to kind of get stronger. And then we wrestled in tournaments like East Stroudsburg, and I think we wrestled junior colleges. I can't remember. But we wrestled like Blair and Navy Prep, and we had wrestling tournaments, and it was like a redshirt year, but I think you almost compete more than a redshirt,
What weight were you wrestling at that point?
177.
Okay.
I think.
Was it was the prep school at Fort Monmouth back then as well?
Yeah, it was at Fort Monmouth, and that was great down there. I mean, I just went back and because my son got a tour there. He got a accepted or offer, and he accepted. So they toured him, gave him a tour at West Point, and they gave him a tour at the prep school. So I got to see that as well. And the new prep schools is fantastic. It has
it's beautiful.
It's amazing. I don't know how many millions they spent on that thing, but the fields out there, and then the view of it itself, looking out on the mountains, that's spectacular. And my son was like, "Wow, Dad, this is really cool." And he was impressed by the weight rooms there and what have you. But so Monmouth was cool because we were away from the flagpole, and we were on the Jersey Shore. And so that was a great year, because we not just matured physically and mentally, and got into that cadet way of life. We had relationships. It's hard to, you're building relationships at West Point, but at the prep school, there's a lot of time. It's a little bit more, I want to say it's not lax, but it's more relaxed, than West Point is. And back in Fort Monmouth, we used to go out on the weekends all the time. We were on the Jersey Shore, and you get to know people, and then you go into West Point for 4 years, and that 5 years together makes these bonds. There's prepsters here and West Pointers here too, but my classmates, the prepsters, I probably have the tightest bond with.
Yeah, I was the very first class at West Point for the prep school.
Really?
Yeah, I just missed it by 1 year. And we'd heard all the stories about going out in the Jersey Shore and stuff. And we were up in Highland Falls, and it was halfway built too. So you talk about all the nice facilities. We didn't have any of that. They had to bus us down to West Point for class. But how many of your classmates stuck from the prep school, from your the wrestling team, all the way through?
Oh, that's a good question. I have no idea. I think, wrestlers?
Yeah.
Yeah. So wrestlers that were on the team that wrestled there, we had, I have other classmates that didn't wrestle at West Point, but for me, Warnick, Reno, Dave Abrams, our 118 pounder. Those are 4 I remember, but my memory's not as good. There could be 1 or 2 more in there.
Yeah, I'm looking back because I was at the prep school at Fort Monmouth too, and I'm like thinking back, like, man, I can't even remember. I remember onesie choosy, like who didn't go from prep school to West Point, but then like who wrestled a few years and didn't. It's hard to remember. But I actually had a work dinner in Red Bank last night, and I was driving through. I drove by Fort Monmouth, and it was just so weird because it just brought back memories that I haven't really been back there since I was like 18 years old. So I was like driving through there, and I was like, I remember like 18-year-old thoughts back then, but it's like, it was just really weird. It was fun.
No, man, I had prep school was such a blast. And then so I was talking to some of the prepsters there, you know, with COVID. And so when I was up there, it was last week.
Yeah.
I said, hey, you know, how is it here? And they've heard, and now even now they've heard about back in Fort Monmouth it was, and the prepsters were saying, you know, they had really tight relationships, and this was and also talking to the plebes right now that were prepsters. So one of the president of the plebe class escorted my son, who's going to prep school, and so the president of the plebe class is also a prepster, and so I was asking them those questions. Hey, how was prep school? Man, I just loved it. You know, we, even though it was COVID, you know, the relationships, and I just had so much fun, you know, right up on the hill, you know, up the hill from West Point. So my son is really excited about it. You know, there's things that he doesn't know about West Point. He'll figure that out just like I did. And so I'm not going to tell him.
What things did you tell him? Like, were you like, okay, I'm gonna make a point to tell you about this, but like, what are some things he maybe like you didn't tell him, unless he's gonna
you know, I really didn't tell him a lot. You know, I've told him about, you know, the relationships and the life bonds, and hey, there were tough times, but there were a lot of good times. You know, I just gave him generalities. You know, I don't want to tell him about, you know, how plebe year really sucks. You know, because he'll figure that out, just like I figured it out. You know, I'm just giving him for the most part, all the good stuff. And he's actually talked to plebes when he was on that tour, and the prepsters. So they gave him the skinny on it. So he'll be fine. He's a wrestler.
Yeah.
So you want to talk about your career at West Point from a wrestling perspective? We got, you know, some of the accolades, like 3-time EIWA place winner, 2-time finalist, 2-time NCAA qualifier. You want to kind of talk through your progression as a wrestler at West Point?
Not really.
Well, you had mentioned earlier, like there was a time where you started to burn out. Was that at West Point? Like,
so, you know, I'll tell you. So my first year, I you know, I did the black and gold and was the starting 190 pounder, and then went to East Stroudsburg, and I think there was another tournament. I won my first tournament, and then went to East Stroudsburg and had a grade 3 MCL tear. So that sucked. And so then after I had my, you know, my surgery on that, I trained and did all my rehab and got ready for the university nationals. And so I was working a lot with another 190 pounder who was a 4-time NCAA finalist and Demon. And that was Dwayne Goldman. So he was an assistant coach. And you know, so he helped me, and then some of my classmates, you know, they're wrestling, just getting out of that injury and training, and that's what kind of got me back is, you know, winning the university nationals and going on the world team and doing that, and then coming back my junior year. I was at 190 and I came down to 177 towards the end of the year. The coach said, I think you'd be more competitive at 177. So I did that, went to the NCAAs there, and then my junior year, you know, did pretty well, and you know, took third and went to the NCAAs, and you know, never made All-American. Had really close matches with each match. I got put out by All-Americans, you know, and every that sucked, but that's, you know. And then my senior year is where I really started to burn out, and I was trying to give my best. Dave and I were captains of the team. I was, you know, there more for my teammates there than I was for myself. You know, I still, you know, have random dreams about, you know, that senior year, because there's a little bit of guilt, you know, with that, because you know, my senior year, I wrestled since age 5, and, you know, West Point's a grind, you know, and I busted my butt in academics, and, you know, graduated, you know, I think 365, and that's with athletic bringing it up and military bringing it up. but I busted my butt, and it was a lot, 2 practices a day, econ, systems engineering, all the military stuff. I'm not, I don't know if it was West Point, but by my senior year, I was starting to burn out. I didn't have that, that same drive that I had, my junior and senior, my freshman, junior, and senior, or my freshman, sophomore, and junior years.
Yeah, Tyler and I were just talking about that earlier on the phone. Just literally just exactly what you were just saying about how your senior year can be tough because there's a lot of distractions. During you got you branching, you're posting, all your friends outside of wrestling are having a blast because you're like on top of the world as a firstie, and now you're still grinding, and so it can be a lot of distractions as a firstie.
So I didn't make the my senior year, I didn't make the NCAA championships, and so what that gave me is there was 4 of us went on spring break. So hey, this is what the spring break thing's all about, right? So we actually went on spring break, and I got to live like a normal college person going on spring break. So
where'd you go?
Bahamas, and it was with the rest. It was wrestlers. I won't tell you who went and what we did. It was just but it was a lot of fun. We just wrestlers are just no moderation. It's go hard all the time, and we had a blast. But and so after West Point, I divorced myself from wrestling. My dad was upset because he wanted me, as the #1 Greco wrestler in the country and at my weight class. And I want you to, just like all the Atwa guys, go be an Olympian. And I was like, nope, I'm going to be a 2nd lieutenant, and I'm going to do something else. And and there's some times in my military career where wrestling popped out, I use my wrestling, but there's situations where I'd use my wrestling but it wasn't to compete. It was something else. I pretty much divorced myself from wrestling. Didn't want to really watch it, think about it, and until my wife, while I was on TDY in my last command before I retired, brought my boys over to youth wrestling. And and I came back and it's like, guess what I did? And it's like, what? So my boys wrestled, some youth wrestling, and then one of them isn't. He's a brainiac, and Jackson is too. But Jackson is he stayed with it, and my oldest. And even my girls wrestled for a year, and they did pretty well.
Wow.
Yeah.
Staying on the theme, we're talking about your senior year and being beat down and kind of burnt out a little bit. I know that's something that definitely hasn't gone away for West Pointers, especially like guys on the wrestling team. Do you have anything that, if there's a cadet who's a sophomore or junior on the wrestling team who's starting to feel that now, what would you have done differently? Or do you think you haven't learned anything from that experience that you could pass on to someone like that?
I would, and I learned this because I got my master's in exercise physiology, kinesiology, whatever. And so I took classes on sports psychology at University of Virginia. That's where I went, and I went back to teach at West Point. So I sat and exercise, I'm in exercise physiology classes, not exercise, sports psychology classes. And they're talking about different sports, wrestlers, they're talking about gymnasts and some of the issues. It's like, that was me. So I would look at, what resources do you have available as a wrestler? So we had, not back then, we had the Center for Enhanced Performance, CEP, and it was different than what it is now. But I think now, based off of the tour I got last week, they have more. I don't know if I think they've got sports psychologists. I think a sports psychologist would be, and there's nothing wrong, with, especially with optimal performance. And hey, here are the things that are, because athletics is so mental. At the elite level, what separates people is your mind, your state of mind, and what you're thinking. And so I would say to the wrestlers there, I don't know if there's sports psychologists at the CEP, but I recommend, you leverage, and be frank and tell them, hey, I'm burnt out. I want to be there. I want to do this. I'm there for my buddies. But this is what I'm thinking. And they work, I got a lot of, especially in my sophomore and junior year, my yearling cow year, I used the CEP for, getting my mind into, optimal competition mode, where I'm thinking positive. Hey, I'm going to go out there, I'm own this, and putting aside negative thoughts. But if I had, so I don't know if I would have gotten that back then, but now I think they've got those resources. I'd get with a sports psychologist, the best one in there, and say, hey, here's how I'm feeling. Here's, I don't want to, I want to perform better. I don't want to feel like this. And how can I do that? What are the things? I learned a lot, all the things I did wrong, or, were going that route when I was in my master's program, which was way too late.
Yeah. Yeah. I think maybe a shameless plug for the Academy too. We're listening to Doc Z's episode that West Point is pretty far advanced right now in that aspect as compared to some other universities. So like you're saying, I mean, the resources are there now, and it's just whether or not guys will take advantage of it. Because I remember guys, even when I was there were a bunch of guys. That's why I was kind of asking earlier how many guys stayed all the way through, because there was a decently high attrition rate on the team when I was there from guys who, especially when I was at prep school, but guys from my freshman year through senior year, there were a lot of guys who ended up leaving the team for one reason or the other.
Yep. No, that would be great if you can push those guys to get some help there and sports psychology.
Yeah, and on Dave Warnick's episode, he talked about his junior and senior year. He felt like if NCAAs were in December, he would All-American. And just like kind of just the grind of the season, just kind of wearing on you, and
so I'm I've really, when I was at UVA, and then I went back to teach at West Point in the Department of Physical Education, there, and this is in every sport. What I didn't go through, it was just intense. It was just the coaching philosophy at that time. It was go hard the whole, from the start of the season to the end of the season. And, you can't do that. And so you're going to peak, around, Penn State duels, which we did. I mean, we always did awesome at Penn State duels. And, but after that, it was, everybody was, on the slide down. So what's important is, understanding here's your base, your base phase of training for wrestling, and you can't be going banging hard, and so there's things that I think you have to, and it depends on each sport, what you do. But there's a base phase where you're working technique, you're getting that fundamental, cardiovascular anaerobic system ready. And then there's a build phase, where you're starting to build on that. And there's certain things, I'm not a exercise physiologist, trained on how to do wrestlers, but I mean, there's some fundamentals there, and then going in for however many weeks that is, or months, to go into your peak. Where do you want to peak at? And that's going to be the EIWAs, right? Or, Navy EIWAs. But that's where you want to peak. So I've seen multiple coaches, and I think it would be good. And I'll get to Chuck Barbie in a second. So I was back at West Point as an officer representative. So I got to see in the beginning the coaches, and Chuck Barbie, I think, so Phil Simpson, and he had multiple All-Americans there. They by that time, they were, from my perspective, were doing more of the, kind of the base build peak, from what I could see. Now, I wasn't on the mat, grinding with the guys. So they would have a better perspective on that. But my recommendation is, I think you're gonna probably ask me at the end who, I've got a good suggestion that may help on folks that you could talk to that have perspectives from other wrestling teams to academy or West Point specific, and how to manage that. So make sure you ask me on who I think should be a guest interviewee.
Yeah.
Well,
That's our last question always.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know you said you didn't want to talk about your wrestling time at West Point. We definitely pulled a lot out of you. So I appreciate your insights on that.
Yeah. I was, a lot of fun. I'm not gonna say I still had a wonderful time my senior year. And it was, the things that I enjoyed the most, we had some great wins, and don't ask me exactly which ones those are. But the time with the guys, traveling, working together on, where we had to have academics and helping one another, going out, when we travel, we'd compete, and then we go out, and trying to live like a college student for a night. Those were, some of my favorite memories, or outside of, of wrestling sometimes,
Yeah.
My favorite memories.
This will be the last question on wrestling, and it's wrestling, but it's unrelated to like the wrestling season. I feel like, times have developed where wrestling now in college, people wrestle all 12 months. There's no break. Now, I didn't really wrestle, we didn't really do that under Chuck Barbie as much. It was like optional. But you competed a lot in the off season, going to, Czechoslovakia, in 1990. Talk to us a little bit about competing wrestling in the off season, and like how maybe there was like mindset, was there mindset shifts? It was different, I know you.
It's going to be different for me. It was, so I wasn't, to be honest, I wasn't a collegiate wrestling fan. College wrestling, so I liked wrestling, but I didn't like the style. We're the only nation in the world that wrestles college wrestling. Everybody wrestles freestyle and Greco. And, in the 80s and 90s, Greco was, the best wrestlers are in Greco. And freestyle was, the second to Greco. I don't know how it is now. But for me, my favorite, style was Greco-Roman. And so for me, when it was postseason, it's what I like to do. It's what I was passionate about. And why I didn't continue with that after, my college career is just, I was done, period. I needed to do something different. I didn't want my identity to be just a, TJ Wright, the wrestler. I wanted, take, a new path. But so to answer your question, I don't have a lot of, advice on, wrestling off season. I loved Greco. I loved wrestling, and I loved practicing Greco. I loved competing in Greco. I wish, they did freestyle and Greco in, elementary, Pee-wee programs all the way through. I think that would be better. But so I can't give you really much help. But I would, my advice is, and this isn't what you're asking, but how to get better, at that elite level is really to study the science of wrestling off season, and look at different wrestlers from other countries, in countries we don't like, watch the Iranian wrestlers and the styles on their tie-ups, and how they're I don't like the government there, but the wrestlers, watch them and play around with those skills. And you're gonna see that in freestyle. You're gonna see it in Greco. Watch the Russian wrestlers, and there's other countries too that are picking up, or that have been, the former Eastern Bloc countries. But watch wrestling. That's what I learned from Joe DeMayo. Is you learn a lot, and he was that APWA Hall of Fame coach. He's you learn a lot by watching wrestling. You learn a lot by I used to say, doing wrestling. You learn a lot from having it done to you, and you learn a lot from coaching. But I think there's one area that, you know, our wrestlers can stop looking at what everybody does in college wrestling. Look at some of the, you know, watch Busavar Satyev, a Chechnyan, you know. He's one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, 7-time world champion, 3-time Olympic champion. Watch him in some of his, you know, what he's doing. And you can see some of his judo styles, from an Ippon Seoinage to a Haraya Goshi. I mean, you'll see some of those things, and you'll see what Iranians are doing. I'd watch and then get in the wrestling room and play around with those things, because you know, Dave Taylor's, I think it's Dave Taylor, whatever. You know, they're competing against these guys and doing that, but you can learn a lot from watching different styles in different countries that are dominating on the international scene.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's so getting back to jumping forward. So you do all the SF stuff. Yeah. Now you finally get the chance to do some of the things that you wanted to do when you went to West Point. Can you kind of talk through your transition from SF into the acquisition corps, and how that set you up for what you do now?
Yeah, so we gotta get into your DPE time first, though. That was after you were in DPE, right? I'm sure there's a million good stories of when you were at teaching back at West Point.
Oh man, I loved teaching at West Point. It was a totally different experience than going there. It was wonderful. So you want me to talk about the teaching?
Yeah, they kind of hand in hand, because you were at DPE when you.
Yeah, so I'll tell you, I taught, you know, so I taught in DPE. They've got exercise physiology classes now, and they have your standard boxing, and they used to have wrestling, combatives, and so my favorite thing that I taught when I was back in DPE was boxing. I just absolutely loved boxing, and I thought it was one of the best classes there at West Point. And it may not have been for you two guys, because you're you know, your wrestling is like one of the ultimate contact warrior sports. A lot of the West Pointers, you know, that come in there haven't been in a fight. I grew up, I fought, I wrestled, I've gotten fights, you know, that was, you know, like that stuff, right? There are a lot of these kids that come in, don't come from those backgrounds, and they've never been in a fight. And I love, my favorite stories were, you know, or my favorite experiences were teaching, you know, these 1,500 SAT geniuses who'd never been in an altercation of any sort, how to face fear and overcome fear in an aggressive, and survive and face all that. And gosh, that was, and I saw that happen. I saw guys, and I'm not going to say his name, but there was a boxer on the jab eval that was, I mean, running, cowering, crying, you know, from a jab eval. And I was like, oh, geez, you know, because that's just kind of my fabric. But all right, this is a kid that's never been in a fight before. And, you know, so our program director when I was there was great, and he still is there, is Ray Barone, who's an amazing man. And I had peers like Jerry Hart and Lenny Bornino and all these other guys, Nick Gist, and so we had a really good program, and Ray taught us with the boxers, hey, make sure they feel like they can be in control. That means you need to teach them everything that they can, you know, they need to know, but put them in a situation where they're in control. They're not getting their ass beaten. You know, they have the opportunity to be in control, and there's the hope of being successful. You know, so control and success is what Ray taught us, and I took that on to the rest of my career after that. I learned, you know, in boxing from Ray Barone and my peers. But so getting back to those boxers, these eggheads, you know, that had never been in an altercation before. So, you know, I would take him. All right, so he really sucks. All right, so I'm going to have him really bad skill go against somebody a lot lighter and sucks too, but you know, he'll survive. And I'd pair him up, right? And because I want both guys to be successful, right? And this isn't my I didn't design it this way. This is Ray Barone, you know, his genius. He wanted guys to be in success and control. But learning from Ray, applying that in with these boxers that had never been in an altercation, wrestling match, fight, whatever, we were actually able to take, you know, this one guy who cowered on a jab eval, you know, that would kind of irk you, you know, to the core, but see that boxer on the graded evaluation at the end. And I remember this one guy, I gave him like a C-, and that was being generous. I gave him a C-, but he had his, you know, his headgear on after his fights like this. He's, you know, blood all over his face. He sucked, but he was getting after it, you know, and being a warrior, horrible boxer, getting his ass whooped. But he got, you know, he faced his fear. He overcame his fear. It was beautiful.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
There was a rumor when I was at West Point, when I was a plebe and I was boxing, that people used to say that back in the day, the instructors would give the opportunity to, like, the first like couple lessons, you could box your instructor, and if you won, you got to validate the course. But like no one ever validated the course because the instructors used to just beat the crap out of it.
Yeah, I don't think that, you know,
if that was ever true.
No, not back in our day, man. They were, I mean, so Ray Barone was one of our instructors. He wasn't the director, but he, and dude's got like hands that are like melons, man. You just do, there's no way, no one would ever want to fight him, man. But no, everybody was, even guys that fought and, you know, been in a lot of fights, we wouldn't even think about challenging our instructors.
Yeah, that plebe rumor mill runs wild, so you never know.
Yeah.
So you were my my boxing instructor, and I vividly remember like the first day.
I honestly, now that you know, I think about it, I remember your name, and I remember, and I called you guys all by your first name. So I'd memorize your name. So what I did was I'd memorize your name, and because I could go into the system, and I had Brian Rowan, I could see, and I memorized them. And so here's kind of the art of it. I'd memorize everybody's name and face, and before we'd start the first class. And so at the first class, you go, okay, what's your name? And you say, I'm Brian Rowan. Okay, where are you from? And so blah blah blah. And you know, what sport? But I knew it all for the whole class. And at the end of the class, you know, and the reason I did that is because I wanted to connect with all the boxers. I want them, hey, so they're doing something. Hey, Brian, you know, straighten out your jab. He's like, you know, yes, sir. All right, great. You're doing a great job, you know. But so I memorized all that stuff. And a lot of guys go, sir, how do you remember all that stuff? That's because I sit there and study it before, you know, the first class. And so that was something I did because I wanted to connect with each boxer, you know, and on a outside of being a cadet, and just, you know, being a warrior, a developing warrior, and talk with them and treat them like an adult and not a plebe.
Was Brian a good boxer? You can be honest.
I don't remember. He's a wrestler, man. I'm sure he did. How'd you do, Brian?
That means no.
I was so pumped because I was like, all right, I'm gonna get to beat some cadets up. Like, this is gonna be great. But I have really short arms. So I remember like when you were teaching, I was like, this is so unfair. Like, I can't remember if you were captain right or major right at the time, but like I would see you like you jab, and your jab was like 8 inches longer than I'm like, that's not fair. But I actually fought another wrestler in our first bout, and it was like I'm fighting another wrestler. So it was pretty much like dead even. And then our second one, I got some like regular cadet, and I beat his ass. It was so fun.
I was in, when I went through, I was with all the football players, and so that was advantageous because I was a wrestler, and I was in, you know, our, you know, wrestlers and the anaerobic, what we do, you know, it just gave us an advantage in there because by, you know, second round they were dying. Just different, you know, training regimens. You know, wrestling's more like boxing than you know, football is like boxing, you know.
Did you get into any of your Greco, you know, background with the team, like when you were as an OR at all, or like do you get on the mat much?
No, I did get on the mat one time and was with a 184 pounder. I was a 190 pounder. And Luke, I can't remember, he was a 184. Calvert.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's like, hey, sir, you want to wrestle? And he knew, you know, it was a 190 pounder. Yeah, sure, Luke, I'll get out there with you. Worst decision I ever made. So I was like, it was like, you know, 10 years later, you know, so what was that, like 2003 or something like that. I get out there and I'm wrestling with him and I'm giving this dude everything I got. And he was a freaking bull. And, you know, so, you know, I was doing spiral rides on him. I was like, man, I was just trying to break him down. I was like, damn, I've lost it. I should not be on the mat with this kid, this man, right? This young man who's like, so I made a very smart decision, you know, with, you know, somebody at my weight class that was, and he was an excellent wrestler. It was like, I didn't, you know, I had shoulder problems already. I already had 2 shoulder surgeries, right? It's like, I don't need, you know, Luke to pull my arm off and beat me with it. So I was like, I'm not gonna do that anymore. But yeah, I did get out, you know, a little bit. I would drill a little bit with the guys, but not go hard with it, because, you know, a Division I wrestler in their prime is, you know, is way beyond a Division I 10 years ago. Yeah. You know, there's a big difference. So, but that was fun. I love that. I went back to my wife. I was, oh man, that's great. And I remember it when the ORs would come and try and wrestle with us. I did not, you know, because they're older dudes, right? You didn't want to hurt them. So I'd rest and I'd make sure they knew that I was in charge. But you know, this is when I was a wrestler, you know, but I wouldn't hurt them because, I mean, they were good dudes and I didn't want to hurt. Yeah. Well, yeah. So that's what Luke was doing with me. He didn't want to, you know, he didn't want to hurt me completely, you know. But yeah, it was good stuff.
That's funny. Yeah. So getting kind of into your transition. So
transition. Yeah, back to transition. So I'm at West Point, DPE, permanent profile, SF guy. You know, I've got you know, cochlear impact. I had a whole bunch of stuff you know, happen to me, and so I've got, you know, I became a permanent profile and had a lot of surgeries while I was there, even though I was teaching DPE. And there was a former company commander when I was in A2 as a plebe, and he's an SCS now. I saw him last week. He's a SCS in PEO soldier, Andy Clements, and he came out of Ranger Regiment. This dude was, I mean, as a company commander, was amazing. I mean, just the greatest leader. And still, you know, he went to Ranger Regiment, had to leave Ranger Regiment because his wife was terminally ill, but went into the dark side of acquisition. When I say that, he was doing, you know, classified type organizations. And so I ran into him at West Point at DP, and he goes, TJ, how you doing? And I was like, I'm doing good. And he was I think we were both majors at the time. And he just came out of doing one of those most classified organizations as a PM. And he was the HRC guy. And he said, we need acquisition. We need SF guys in acquisition. I was like, what? And so, hey, here's what it is. And he explained it to me. And I was like, okay, I'm interested. And, you know, and he had followed my career, you know, with, you know, going MI and then becoming a scout and best ranger and all that stuff. And so after the accession timeline for acquisition, you know, when you're supposed to do it, he just said, I got it. I mean, this is the type of guy that was, you know, is still, I mean, very revered and respected. He got me through the system outside of the normal acquisition process. And that's how I became an acquisition officer. I mean, he made that happen. And I was supposed to go to a very classified organization to start off with, but he then said, hey, I'm gonna put you over in PEO soldier. And that was, you know, that was great for me. And so I went from, you know, the operational side, special forces, to DPE, then to the acquisition side, and then soon got into, you know, acquisition for, you know, the dark side, doing stuff. And it was an easy transition for me, you know, because you still have, you know, and when I was a PEO soldier and SOCOM doing acquisition, you're still working with, you know, the soldiers, you know, and special operators, they're teams of teams, they're the people that need the resources and equipment, and you know, they need people supporting them. and that are like-minded. And I found the transition very easy. And you're just working with people, and I loved it. I mean, I loved my acquisition career, had a wonderful time. And then so that brought me into when I retired in 2014. I wanted to go into industry. So we'll go back. I went to West Point because I wanted to be this corporate guy. I wanted to be Alex P. Keaton from Family Ties, right? And 22 years later, it's like, all right, now I'm gonna go on the corporate side. So I did that. I went to a really good small company, and a really good leader at the top, and started off as like a PM and became a director and then a VP. And I learned everything I could about that small company, or how to be a small company, or everything I needed to do to start my own company. So in 2017, I started my own company, and we're about 5 years now, and we've got another company that I'm a managing partner for, and I love it because my main company right now, the OSS, the people that are on that team for the staff are people I want to have on that team. People that are like on the wall of the wrestling room, they chase greatness. So my CTO wrestled in Idaho, got his master's at University of Iowa, but he was a wrestler. My COO is a college football player, and strong academic guy, but he was played at JSU. He's like 230, and he's still in awesome shape. And there's others in my companies, everybody that is kind of vetted and they chase greatness. And that's one of the things that we try to find in our company. People that we bring in is we don't want to just bring in somebody to do the job. We want people that are passionate about what they do and are good at it. And sometimes it may not necessarily need to be the exact skill. They're good at what they do, but we like to find people that are passionate about something. It could be, I don't know, it could be needlework, but they're the best needle worker. I don't know, that's a crazy, you pick it. We're looking for people that are passionate about something and want to be great at something. And I love to have athletes too, competitive athletes. I mean, that always, if I see somebody that's a competitive athlete and they're good at their jobs, like, all right, I'm gonna keep an eye on that person. But I love what I'm doing now, and because we're building a team, and they have input to the systems and the tools and the resources. I'm really enjoying it, and I don't think I would have been where we're at right now as a company without my wrestling experiences and without my special forces experience and acquisition and my boxing and DPE. Learning, I take those things I've learned from being a boxing instructor about control, giving a boxer control and success. And you do the same thing for an employee. Give them enough control, so you're not micromanaging, but you're going to have to train them and resource them, so they can be successful. Define what success is, have them define what success is, and then have them drive towards it. I mean, all the stuff I've taken in from and learned so much from wrestling, from boxing, from teaching, from special forces, and I'm just taking that and applying it to a company, and it's freaking fun.
Yeah, I think that's so big to hear too, because when you're a high school kid looking at going to West Point, whether it's for athletics or for whatever, you look at the Army and everyone assumes that, you go to the Army, you're going to be in a foxhole somewhere cold at night. Like, oh, what is that? What can that do for me? Like past just being in the Army. But, there you kind of just tied all that stuff together for kids who are looking at West Point or getting recruited by West Point that may want to do other things that, you're in the position that you're in, and you just, tied all those things together. So I think that's something that we may not do as well on this podcast of highlighting. So appreciate your insights with that.
Yeah, right on. My pleasure, man. This is so what else you guys want to talk about?
We definitely want to know.
What did you get for a grade? What did I give you, Brian, for a boxing grade?
I think I got a B+. I have to go back.
Sure. I kind of remember. I remember two rests. I bet you got. Are you sure you didn't get an A?
I don't know. I gotta find. I think my transcript is actually like in my drawer here. Maybe I'll find it. I'll have to look at my transcript.
Well, let me know. Yeah, I remember your face, and I remember the name, and I remember the last name and first name. I mean, I forgot. It's been years, but that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'll have to report. I know. I got a copy of it in my my previous, like, what they call it? What's like the book where you keep all your OERs and all that stuff?
I Love Meat book.
Yeah, I have one of those still. That's like, it has all my stuff in it from West Point too.
Yeah.
The last thing, I mean, we you guys had a class reunion recently. I saw, Reno put up, I think it was maybe like a year ago. You guys.
Oh yeah. So
got together.
yeah, and I'm on my ass on that. So last year, it was for Carrie Tucker's birthday. We had a wrestling reunion that we did in Dallas, and Reno, I think, put it together, and it was phenomenal. I mean, just we stayed up all. I mean, I needed days after that to recover, because we would stay up. I mean, we'd stay up all night just talking, and we did that for like 3 days straight. And we're supposed to do that here in Huntsville, this year, and I've got to get that time out to the guys. And I think some of the guys at other year groups want to come too. But boy, we had a blast, and we just pick up. There's a lot of Army wrestlers and classmates in Dallas area, and but we've got some here. Warnick's here, I'm here, and I'm probably missing somebody else. But in the area, we've got some wrestlers. But yeah, we're going to do a reunion, hopefully again this year, and keep it going, because it's great to, it was great. It was good for the soul for us to all get back together. We pretty much got the whole class of '93 wrestling team, which was pretty much the starting team, right, all together, and that was fantastic.
Wow, that's awesome.
You got your 30-year reunion coming up here next year. As well.
Yeah. Wow. Huh. Yeah, I guess I didn't even think about that. I guess I got to go to that. And hopefully my son's there, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I gotta go, right?
Yeah, that'd be pretty cool. He'll be a plebe at that point, So it'll be I went to my 10-year reunion a couple of years ago, and that was a lot of fun. A lot of
So I was teaching at DPE, and Dave Warnick and Nancy, his wife, stayed with us, and that was a lot of fun. But it's I think more fun probably later, because when you're 10-year reunions are kind of funky. Everybody's trying to impress everyone, so at 30 it's hey, what are your kids are doing? Even some have grandkids, right? So that'll be a lot of fun to do. So I need to, thanks for the reminder.
Yeah. Tyler, what else you got? You got any questions?
Brian writes the notes for these things, so I'm all tapped out now.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we've hit on a ton of stuff, so it's been awesome. This has been a really fun one.
Man, I had guys, I really appreciate it. So I think one question you guys ask is, who should you bring back? Here's a recommendation I have. I don't know if you've gotten this recommendation yet. Because I thought about it, what wrestlers, we talked about, sports psychology. We talked about periodization, with base, build, peak, optimal training and all that stuff. There's perspectives, and I think it'd be very helpful for this coach and other coaches and coaches of, Pee-wee programs out there, and high school programs, is hearing from coaches, coaches that, like Jack Spates. I think Jack Spates, I think every coach could learn. Jack Spates was one of the best recruiters. I mean, you talk to anybody that, was recruited by Jack Spates. He's retired, he went on to he started that Cornell or made Cornell, what it is today. And Rob Cole has obviously done phenomenal there. But have Jack Spates talk about, you guys interview him, talk about, recruiting, and, that Dave and other guys said you're a great recruiter. He's a great coach too. But get a perspective of a coach at West Point and then a coach that went on to Cornell and Oklahoma. Going back, what would you say to that coach, when you were a coach? What would you say to yourself, or what would you say to the coach right now? And then you had Jack Effner, intense dude, great, really good coach. I think he coached there, and then I think he went on to coach another school. I don't know, but I know, but he's got those experiences. Dwayne Goldman was assistant coach there, and then went on to Indiana. He was only there, I think, for 2 years. Chuck Barbie, very successful. And I watched him as OR on his, periodization, and how I saw it. As wrestlers, you may, going through it, may see something different. But I think the coaches can give a perspective, wrestling at or coaching at different colleges. Being college athletes, coaching at West Point, and coaching at other colleges. What would you go back and tell the current coach, or what would you tell the wrestlers? What did they learn about the sports psychology of burn? Because it's not just West Pointers that burn out their senior year. There's a lot of other guys that started at 5 and 6 years old that competed at an intense level at going out to Fargo and doing all that stuff. So it's not just West Point. Those guys, talking with them, I think you could get some valuable insights that could really impact wrestlers, current wrestlers, and guys that go into coaching. I think there's a lot. That's one recommendation.
Yeah, I think we had Chuck Barbie on. He's the only coach other than Coach Ward that we've had on as far as head coaches and previous head coaches. I now have to go back to Coach Barbie and ask him some of those questions, because those are great questions I didn't even think about. We need to have Coach Effner on for sure. Coach Steers has been somebody that's come, that.
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
Really, just to kind of put the pieces together, because people will mention tidbits about coaches and things like that, but you're there at West Point for 4 years. You're kind of going through the grind. You don't really think about it. The coaches have so much, perspective on the West Point wrestling program, especially, Coach Effner and Coach Steers were there for so long. We need to.
Yeah. The other recommendation I have is, is having co-captains on. You don't want to hear from me again. You don't want to hear from Dave again, or he and I beating each other. We've known each other since prep school, poking each other. But, another recommendation is having co-captains on together. What did you learn and what could you have done? What did you do great as a captain, and what didn't you do? And then you have good, funny stories in there. And like, if Dave and I, we've already done our thing here, but we poke each other, New York and PA, and we've known each other for freaking ever, but having like, Jack Ventress and Jake Garcia, they were our co-captains, when I was a Cal. They're great dudes. Just world-class guys. They were great co-captains. They've got stories. Just there's humor there. There's going to be a lot of humor there. Things that they and there's going to be the feeding off each other. I'll give more stories. I think a lot of insight, things that could enrich your podcast.
You said Jack Ventress, and who was the other one?
Jake Garcia. So Jack Ventress, I think he's an infantry colonel, real successful career. Then Jacob Garcia, he went to, he did that inter-service branch transfer thing where he became a Navy navigator. He did that, and then went to Stanford. And I ran into him when we had a reunion this past year out in Dallas, Texas. But successful. You'll find just about every Army wrestler, and is doing something very interesting. But those two guys would be You know, you can have them each on separately, but maybe just to kind of mix it up, you know, the coaches to talk about those things we talked about, and having co-captains from different years, you know, on there to, you know, I think they could feed off one another. So those are my 2 recommendations.
You know, these are the best recommendations I think we've gotten. Shots fired at all the previous episodes, but the thought you put into that, I really appreciate that.
Oh no, it was, you know,
normally people
sometimes I trip over things, you know, I've hit my head so many damn times. Now it's finally working better. I don't know. But
awesome.
yeah.
Well, we appreciate you coming on tonight. This was a lot of fun.
Man, it was a blast talking with you guys and getting your perspectives. And so Brian, you're down at Fort Bragg?
No, I was at Fort Bragg. I moved up back to Pennsylvania a year ago from the Fort Bragg area.
Yeah. So where, you know, so if I do business after the fact, we won't hold up this up, but love to talk with you guys offline too, and lots of good stories that, you know, aren't appropriate for viewing on this podcast. But yeah, would love to, you know, give you some insights, Tyler, on some of the things we talked about offline on your career and future and opportunities, and you as well, Brian, just to chat. I really enjoyed chatting with you guys and learned a lot from you both. So thank you.
Yeah. Appreciate it. Appreciate you.
Appreciate it. And thanks to listeners for listening in. This was a long one. This was awesome. So
hey, go Army.
Be Navy, BHAW.
That's right.
Thanks for tuning in to the BHAW radio show. If you like what you heard, be sure to subscribe and leave us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast platform. If there's something you'd like to hear on a future show, reach out to us on any of our social media, Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. Or you can reach us at email, bhaw.radio@gmail.com. We'd love to hear your thoughts, and as always, go Army, be Navy.